Conservancy. I'll turn it over to Joe in just a moment. Before I do that, I just want to go over some housekeeping with everyone. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the lecture. So at that time, I'll unmute everyone or allow you to unmute yourself and we'll share some questions and answers. You're welcome to turn your video off if you're more comfortable that way during the lecture. Just so you know, I am recording this, and we will make that recording available to everyone at the end. Probably next week, we'll send that out to folks. If you would like to chime in with any comments or you want to write down your questions as we go, you are welcome to open up that chat box, which is in the bottom right corner. Again, comments, questions, and we'll get to those questions at the end. Okay, so I think we are ready, Joe, if you'd like to take it over.
All right, welcome everyone. Unfortunately, I cannot see, I only see my presentation screen, so I can't really tell who's in here, but I'm sure many familiar names are here, so welcome. We're glad to have you on this chilly day, as you all know. For those of you who may not know me, I am Joe Verstandig, the Living Collections Manager here at the Newport Tree Conservancy. I wear several hats: horticulturist, nurseryman, propagator, educator, plant enthusiast. Do many things here, and we do many things here at the Newport Tree Conservancy. Everything trees. We do programming like this program that you're in right now. We are responsible for the procurement and purchasing of many of the trees planted in public spaces and some private spaces as well throughout the city. We have a nursery, our Heritage Tree Center, where we are propagating historic plant materials in Newport. We're in the schools, working with kids, young to throughout I guess K through 12. So we do many things at the Newport Tree Conservancy, everything tree related and everything plant related, and we love getting people excited about plants. A few things on today's presentation before we get started. I'm going to start off with a couple introductory observations, and then we'll jump into a couple plant groups. We're going to talk about witch hazels at some length and go over some cultivars. We're gonna dive into camellias as well. I know some of you may not be familiar with camellias all that much. I'm not. I don't claim to be a camellia expert, but you can grow them. We can grow them here in Southern Rhode Island. So we'll take a look at some plants in Newport, and then we'll kind of go over the broad scope of other flowering trees and shrubs available to your gardens. And there are some good ones and some interesting ones. And I'm sure some of the plants we go over today, you may not know, or maybe you know a little bit about, but didn't know it can be grown or successfully cultivated in Rhode Island. So with that, let's get started. So while most of you were probably in your warm houses and beds this morning at 7 a.m., I was outside observing how the cold is affecting witch hazel flowers. As many of you know, witch hazels, many of the cultivars are now in full bloom. So I was curious. I wanted to see what 15 degrees would do to the flowers. And the picture here on the left, this is the cultivar Pallida, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. You can see it almost looks like there's a breeze blowing through the flowers kind of sideways. And that's actually just the petals of this plant are actually frozen, and they're just like solid in place. And actually, if you were to touch the petals, they'd actually fall off at the most minute touch because the water in the flowers is actually frozen. So many of you are probably thinking, well, will this temperature hurt these flowers? And the answer is mostly no. They kind of shrivel up and freeze. And then once the temperature warms up tomorrow, when we get back above, well above freezing, the flowers will thaw out and kind of regain their vigor. It might take a little shelf life off the flower duration, but overall, not much damage. This plant on the right here is Arnold Promise, which is in full bloom. Pallida has been in bloom for like 2 or 3 weeks. So this plant is, coming kind of on the latter end of its bloom cycle. Yeah, so very interesting to see these plants in such cold temperatures and still looking quite beautiful. Also, many of you have probably noticed that silver maple is in full bloom throughout the state. And I had a friend recently text me. He was wondering about the identification of a tree in his backyard, which happened to be silver maple, and he was a little nervous because he's new to beekeeping and he has several hives in his backyard, and he was wondering, where his bees, which during the warm period we had in the middle of the month, yeah, a few of his hives were quite active, and the bees were coming back with pollen. You can see the pollen on the abdomen and the leg of the bee here, and he was surprised that this tree flowered so early, but that's typical of silver maple to bloom with a mild period in late winter. But he was also excited and a little bit nervous that his bees, were coming back with pollen. And he kind of feared the worst, but it was just the silver maple providing that energy source as his hives were active during the mild period of the month. So let's dive into witch hazels, one of my favorite groups of woody plants. I have many favorites, but witch hazels certainly rank near the top, probably the most well-known group of winter flowering trees and shrubs. Witch hazels, for the most part, are kind of like an ornamental shrub. They have a spreading growth habit, usually grown as a multi-stemmed plant, sometimes trained to a tree form, and we have a few of those in Newport. There are 5 to 6 species of witch hazel, depending on what taxonomic authority you go to. 4 of our 4 species are of horticultural importance. Can't speak right now. And we will look at those species today. And there's also a hybrid group, which makes up probably the bulk of the varieties grown in our gardens. And we will dive deeper into some of those cultivars. Flowering from October through March. If you were a witch hazel nut and you wanted to try and get all the witch hazels you could probably achieve flowering on a witch hazel from mid-October through the end of March. You might have a gap in like December, like from, maybe Thanksgiving to Christmas. You might be able to, it might be tough to fill that space. But other than that, you could probably have a plant flowering at all times in southern Rhode Island through that period. This plant on these 2 pictures here are Arnold's Promise, and both of these pictures were taken in the last week. And this picture is of a beautiful variety called Aphrodite, which is a beautiful reddish orange flowered variety. One of my favorites. So first we'll start off with the vernal witch hazel or Ozark witch hazel, native to the Ozark region of the United States, Arkansas, Missouri, Hemamelis vernalis. And this is, I wouldn't say it's kind of like the stepson of the witch hazels, but it might not get the same attention, as the flowers are considerably smaller than some of the hybrid varieties or some of the other Asiatic species, or even our other native species. You can see that the flowers generally are considerably smaller, maybe a ½ inch in length. And just as kind of like an overall fact, witch hazels have these spidery strap-like flowers that emerge from these bright calyces, or basically bracts that kind of protect the flower when it's in bud. So the calyces combined with the flower is kind of the overall floral effect of the plant. And yeah, Hemamelis vernalis, the vernal witch hazel, the flowers are smaller, and generally from, kind of stepping back and looking at the plant, the overall aesthetic of the plant may not be as great as some of the other varieties we'll look at. Wonderful fragrance on the Hemamelis vernalis, and also a wonderful array of colors. You'll notice that, this plant up here, I believe this is the cultivar sachet. I'm not sure. And it's kind of like this nice orange color. Then you might have like a bi-colored effect with like maybe a red at the base of the petal, kind of coming down to a light orange, and then you'll have just kind of your overall golden yellow, probably the most common color that witch hazels produce. And this holds true in the wild. So plants will flower kind of an array of colors from red to orange to yellow. And usually the floral period of the vernal witch hazel is the earliest, usually starting to bloom in southern Rhode Island around the end of January. And it's really in the middle of the month when the plant blooms in its native habitat. But usually from the end of January into February is when the vernal witch hazel bloom for us. And so that's kind of an area. It's like the true middle of winter. So that's really when you're lacking for flowers. And so the vernal witch hazel can supply you with blooms in a desolate period. Grows to be a large shrub. I was looking at plants in the URI Botanical Garden recently that were probably 15 feet tall and 20 feet wide. Beautiful array of colors. Amethyst represents a breakthrough for all witch hazels, kind of a true purple. I kind of think it's more of like a neon pink, but it's purple enough, and considered to be a hybrid, actually, of one of the Asiatic species. It was grown from open pollinated seed and selected by Tim Brotzman, who's a big witch hazel guy. And if you're into witch hazels and you do a lot of research on witch hazels, his name comes up frequently. He's a nurseryman from Ohio. So he selected this plant in the early 2000s from open pollinated seed. And this is one of the plants that emerged. So truly a remarkable color. Not the most floriferous plant, will grow to be a large shrub. And based on my observations, may suffer from graft incompatibility. And we'll take a look, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is in a little bit. But truly a beautiful flower color. Quasimodo is really more of a collector's item. Again, this is another vernal witch hazel type. It's a true dwarf, short internodes. The leaves are considerably smaller than the species. The flowers, I would say, are even for the vernal witch hazel are quite small. The fragrance there's not a lot of fragrance to this variety, unfortunately. It really is more of a collector's item, blooming in the middle of winter in January, may mature to be 4 feet tall and 4 feet wide over some years, maybe even a little bit larger than that. Certainly interesting, but not my favorite plant. More of a collector's item. So now we'll jump into our native witch hazel, or commonly called the common witch hazel, Hamamelis virginiana. This is an extremely abundant plant in Rhode Island and really throughout New England, growing as an understory shrub or sometimes a small tree in our woodlands. Flowers in October through November, and it has this nice, almost light sulfur yellow flower and a green calyx, and that's a good way to separate it from the Asiatic species. It's kind of this yellowish green calyx. Beautiful flowers, probably close to an inch long, strap-like petals, usually a little bit twisted and crimped, and usually flowering when the foliage is still on the plant. Beautiful yellow fall color throughout October. So kind of the light from the sunlight reflecting off the leaves and kind of gets reflected into the flowers. So it's just kind of like a glowing yellow, kind of an overall effect, and it's beautiful. A great native plant. One of my favorite plants. I love the native witch hazel. Great for fall color and flowers as well in the fall. Important to note that this is a large plant. Usually, this is actually one plant pictured at the North Farm Arboretum in Bristol, believe it or not, and grows to be, typically grows to be around 10 feet tall, maybe 15 feet wide, kind of an irregular form. This plant was probably, close to 30 feet wide. 10, 15 feet tall at its highest point. So really more of a large spreading shrub. Doesn't really tend to sucker, but has this distinct spreading habit. This was a massive old plant. There are a few cultivated varieties of our native witch hazel. I haven't listed them because I don't really have any good photos. One plant that is close to me is Mohunk Red. I worked for a couple of years as an intern at the Mohunk Mountain House in New Paltz, New York, as a gardener. And Mohunk Red was selected from the Minnewaska State Preserve there, so close to where I was working. And it's kind of I wouldn't say it's a true red. It might have some reddish at the base of the petals, kind of more of an orange effect overall. Harvest Moon is another cultivar selected from Broken Arrow Nursery. I'm sure some of you might be familiar with that. And that's a later flowering form after the foliage is dropped. So it's effective because the foliage does not cover the flowers. And that, believe it or not, that's not what's pictured here. This is a plant photographed here. This is a plant extant at Blythewald Arboretum in Bristol. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Blythewald Mansion Gardens and Arboretum. And as far as I can tell, this witch hazel originated again as a rejected graft, where the understock kind of took over the top portion of the plant, or the desirable portion of the plant, and grew on. According to Julie Morris, the director of horticulture emeritus there, this was actually a Julina at one point, but now grows as just the species Hemamelis virginiana. But what's unique about it is it flowers considerably later. This picture, both these photos were taken in November, mid-November, probably even late November. After the foliage has dropped, the flowers are produced in abundance, wonderful fragrance. You can see here again, I'm not tricking you. This is not an Arnold's Promise. You can see the green calyces here, so yellow-green calyces. So you know it's a Hemamelis virginiana. And this plant, in my opinion, is valuable because of that. And I think it's worthy of propagation and possible introduction into the nursery production system because of this value. And my thought is it would be nice to name it after Fred Perry, the longtime director of horticulture at Blythewald, who some of you know recently passed away. So I haven't told many people about this idea, and I will probably bring it to the people at Blythewald at some point. But this is a beautiful Hemamelis virginiana that I think is valuable and worthy of propagation. So stay tuned. Japanese witch hazel. So the first Asiatic species we're going to cover, Hemamelis japonica. And this is a photograph from the Arnold Arboretum. William, aka Ned Friedman, their director of the Arnold Arboretum there, and an avid photographer. The Japanese witch hazel, obviously native to Japan, comes in many varietal forms, which basically just means geographic variants that are slightly different in habit or color. You can see this is the forma, sometimes recognized as a variety, the form of flavopurpurescens. And this form has kind of, the reddish base, kind of that, again, that bicolored strap-like petal. You can see at the base, that purplish reddish color kind of forming into a light yellow. So there's a handful of these geographic variants that, range from red to kind of, orange. A lot of them have, again, this bicolored effect on the petals. And it's through these geographic variants that a lot of the selected crosses and selected breeding, or controlled crosses and selected breeding, I should say, was done to get the colors we have in a lot of our witch hazels, the reds, the oranges. It's through these variants of the Hemamelis japonica is where we get a lot of the colors we've come to know in our hybrid witch hazels. So again, grows to be a large shrub or small tree, and quite floriferous with long, usually skinny petals. The Chinese witch hazel, native obviously to China, throughout much of central and southern China, grows to be more of a compact plant, maybe not quite as floriferous, like in terms of overall total flowers produced, but again, beautiful, often curled, golden yellow flowers with these, these dark red calyces for contrast. So this is the other Asiatic species, the Hemamelis mollis. And together, the Chinese witch hazel and the Japanese witch hazel combine to form the hybrid group that we know, that we've come to know very well, Hemamelis ex intermedia. And this hybrid was first recognized at the Arnold Arboretum, I want to say in the 1940s, when a group of seeds, a seedling population was grown, collected from a Hemamelis mollis as the female parent, and the characteristics of each seedling were very different. The leaf characteristics, varying amounts of pubescence on the backs of the leaves, which is kind of the way you can separate these plants, is through hairs on the leaves and leaf form. So it was determined that this was actually these were hybrids of these two trees, or two shrubs brought together in gardens. And it was from that first seedling population that Arnold's Promise, which is the plant pictured in both of these photos, was formed. And it's kind of amazing that the first time that this hybrid group ever kind of hybrid, well, I shouldn't say it was the first time, maybe it went unrecognized, but the first time, a seedling population of this hybrid was raised, it birthed probably the most superior and popular cultivar, Arnold's Promise, which is the most probably by far, well, I shouldn't say by far, but certainly the most popular cultivar of the ex intermedia group, hybrid group. Beautiful, golden yellow flowers, super floriferous, produces a lot of secondary twiggy growth. So a lot of the secondary growth is these kind of lateral twigs, and on these twigs, numerous flower buds are formed. So the overall effect is extremely floriferous, and really bright and striking in the landscape. Another hybrid type, ex-intermediate type, Pallida, kind of another one of the old standbys, originating from Wisley in England, and I believe the original plant is still extant there. And again, long strap-like petals, these bright red calyces for contrast, and almost a sulfur yellow color, really kind of this light, bright sulfur color that stands out in the landscape. I really like this one. I like Pallida a lot because of that sulfur yellow color. Very fragrant, I should mention as well. Arnold Promise, very fragrant flowers. This one blooms a little earlier. This is probably going by in most gardens at this point this year. And here we have both of them, and you can see the full plants. Arnold Promise is valuable not only for its floriferous nature. I should mention again that Arnold's Promise is very fragrant, especially kind of like the second half of its bloom period, but also because of its upright vase-shaped form that allows it to kind of fit into the garden very well, and allows for allows you to garden underneath the plant. Pallida is a robust, has more of a spreading habit, multi-stemmed habit, and you'll notice that there's retained dead leaves on Pallida, and I've noticed that not on young Pallidas, but on older ones, and it's very interesting. And it's also important to note that with witch hazels, this will vary on be variable from year to year based on weather and climate. These the retention of dead leaves, even obviously bloom time, fragrance, it can vary drastically based on what kind of season you've had, and was it a dry summer, is it a cold winter. So a lot of that stuff is variable, but I have noticed that mature Pallida unfortunately retains a lot of dead foliage. Senesced foliage would be the best way to put that. Diane, another one of the more popular hybrid types, and it is considered to be the best red, and really a striking bright red. Variable from year to year. If you get a nice moist summer and a nice cool winter where the temperature doesn't fluctuate a lot, you'll get a really brilliant red color. The large strap-like petals are often curled. They probably will unfurl more so as the bloom period goes on. Not as fragrant as Palette or Arnold's Promise, but definitely a noticeable sweet fragrance. It's also, I should mention that the witch hazels really need to be fragrant because obviously there's not as many pollinators active during this time. So obviously you need something to help attract what pollinators are available to these plants. And for witch hazels, in most cases, it seems to be flies are the most common pollinator you see buzzing around. On some of the warm days recently, there were numerous flies in some of the Arnold Promise and Palette plants I was observing. So Diane, one of the old standbys for the reds. Furzabe, or Fire Charm or Fire Magic, is obviously of German origin, is another one of the good reds. Not as familiar with this one. Seems to emerge more of a true red, an orangish red, and then kind of fade to more of a glowing pink color, which is kind of fascinating. And again, variable, may change from year to year, at least to some degree. Also worth mentioning, this is a very vigorous plant as well, vase-shaped habit, kind of like Arnold's Promise. So it's valuable in that way as well. I'm going to take a sip of water. Fragrant flowers as well on Fire Charm, usually marketed as Fire Magic, I want to say, but probably Furzabe, Fire Charm, and Fire Magic, all you'll see this plant named as all three. Gelina. This one is one of my favorites, one of many people's favorites. The story goes, well, first I should mention Robert and Gelina de Belder, a Belgian couple, who are responsible for the introduction of many witch hazel cultivars. They did a lot of work at their arboretum in Belgium, Kalmthout. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Gelina is one of them. And the story goes that this plant was causing such a stir at a flower show. People were pressuring Robert. What is this? What is this plant? It's beautiful. And there on the spot, as he had been recently married, he named the plant after his wife, Gelina. And the rest is history. A lovely color, a unique color, kind of, again, a bi-colored effect where the base is more of an orange and kind of coming into more of a yellow, but more of a, I would say more of a light orange as you travel down the petal. Beautiful overall, sometimes with the reds and the oranges. If you take a step back and you look at the plant, it doesn't give the most, brilliant, striking effect as some of the yellows do, because the orange color or the red color can kind of blend in with the browns and the tans of winter. Not with Gelina. Gelina stands out beautifully. So for that, it's very valuable. Grows to be a spreading shrub, kind of upright in youth, will spread with age and grow to be quite large. I do want to mention quickly, because this is a problem I see far too much, and a lot of people who cultivate witch hazels have issues with this, is rejected grafts. So you can see here in the picture that there is these yellow flowers, presumably from the desired plant, and then the majority of the plant is actually, you can't really see here, you can kind of see the brown of the flowers that are mostly gone by at this point, but this is actually Hemamelis vernalis. It's a vernal witch hazel. And what has happened here is this desired plant, which we'll just call Arnold's Promise, I'm not sure exactly what it is, was grafted onto Hemamelis vernalis. Most witch hazels are grafted onto either Hemamelis vernalis or Hemamelis virginiana as means of propagation, because rooting cuttings isn't overly easy, and obviously you can't grow from seed, because seed you're not going to get the desired plant. So a lot of these plants most of these plants are grafted. And what happens is incompatibility, the root system of which the desired plant is grafted onto, kind of takes over. It has more vigor, it has more energy, and it sends up suckers. Might sucker from the base or sucker from the roots. Hemamelis vernalis will sucker from the roots, where Hemamelis virginiana, the common witch hazel, won't do that as much. So what has happened here is this root system has basically taken over, sending up suckers from the roots and probably from the base of the trunk as well. And this is preventable if you pay attention. If you notice suckering, and even if you're not sure if it's below the graft union, usually you can tell a plant is grafted because there'll be like kind of a change in texture, and there'll be like essentially a marking in the trunk, an indentation, or kind of a swollen area where that graft union is. And you should remove any suckering from anywhere near that area, because it's best to prevent, kind of allow your plant to develop a nice multi-stemmed habit where there's only a couple stems at the very bottom to prevent, branches from crossing and whatnot. So pay attention. If you are going to cultivate witch hazels, it's best to remove any of the low-growing shoots and suckers, because that very likely will be an undesirable plant, which will over time cause the plant to be, taken over. So now let's jump into camellias. Like I said, I don't claim to be a camellia expert, but because it is proving true that we can grow these plants in our gardens, I think I might as well try to be, or at least strive to be. So camellias are beautiful flowering, evergreen shrubs to small trees native to Asia. There are many species. Some of the ones listed here on the left are the more popular ones in cultivation. Camellia japonica, probably the most popular. Camellia sasanqua. I always want to say Susquana. Don't know why. Camellia sinensis, or tea. Tea is produced from Camellia sinensis leaves. Sinensis. I always say that wrong. Camellia oleifera is also a popular form, or a popular species, I should say. So again, very tremendous diversity with flower color and flower shape. Like dahlias and daffodils, the flowers are classified by their shape and form, and we'll talk about some of those. And again, glossy green, evergreen foliage. So overall, beautiful plants through the season because of that evergreen foliage. Numerous hybrids and cultivars, as mentioned, too many to count, probably in the thousands. Flowering from late fall through the spring, depending on cultivar and species. Generally, what I've noticed is the cold hardy varieties that we can cultivate in protected locations in our gardens tend to be spring flowering. So it might be wise, because if we get a negative degree cold snap and we have flowers in February or January, they'll get obliterated. It might be best to procure plants that flower later, after the threats of those deep freezes has passed. Generally, camellias are cold hardy to about 0 degrees. Some of the more cold hardy varieties and some of the species are listed as going till -5 degrees, -10 degrees, maybe. Sounds a little iffy. So I would say for best culture, protection from cold winter winds is necessary throughout Rhode Island, zone 6B to 7A, which we kind of are on Aquidneck Island and southern and coastal Rhode Island. And there are many cold hardy varieties that have been selected, so select those plants. And those are the plants that will tend to be offered in the nurseries. And the growers do a good job of letting you know which plants are the most cold hardy. So I'm going to show you a couple plants that are growing outside in the open air in Newport. So this is one, and I'll keep the locations undisclosed so mobs of people don't go to view them in the spring. This is a plant in Newport that is absolutely striking. These beautiful red flowers appearing in late March, early April. And I think, based on Google image searches, I think this is the cultivar April Tryst, which is this beautiful red flower. It's described as an anemone flower form. And when I think of an anemone flower, I think of kind of this thin layer of petals surrounding bright yellow stamens and the reproductive structures. And this kind of has that collar of petals, but on the inside, it's kind of got this, more of a peony flower type. So I've decided that this flower form is going to be called the formal anemone flower form, and that's official now that I have said it. This plant is probably 4 to 5 feet tall, very densely foliated, beautiful glossy green foliage, maybe some slight winter burn. This plant is in a relatively exposed location. There are no windbreaks protecting this plant. And then flowers at various stages, from in bud to gone by to fallen on the ground. But a beautiful flower in the late spring, or I should say late winter, early spring. And generally, camellias don't tend to be fragrant, although some of the cultivars are fragrant. So I think this is April Tryst, and this is a cold hardy variety nonetheless. So this is one I would recommend trying to procure. Another plant growing in the open air in Newport is this beautiful pink cultivar. Not sure which one. I think, generally there's more of the semi-double flower forms, or kind of the thin layer of petals. Large flower, maybe 5 inches in diameter, 6 inches in diameter, non-fragrant, not as floriferous as the red flowered form we just looked at, but held on an upright plant, again, densely foliated, really dark glossy green foliage. This plant was in a protected location. I knocked on the door. The plant was right on the sidewalk. I knocked on the door and no one answered. So I helped myself to a couple photographs. Beautiful plant. This was probably in a little bit later. This was probably in the 2nd or 3rd week of April, I want to say. So not a winter flowering plant, but a beautiful one nonetheless. And the most remarkable camellia that I've seen growing, again, in the open air in Newport, is this one. And again, I'm going to keep the location a secret. A beautiful plant, maybe 10 feet tall, rounded habit, extremely densely foliated, dark glossy green foliage, some sooty mold. Sooty mold may be a problem with some camellias. Beautiful peony form, pink flowers, so bright I almost considered dulling the photograph's color because it would potentially hurt some eyes. I decided not to do that. So this is the true color, or at least how my camera captured it. This beautiful bright pink coloration and numerous layers of petals stacked on top of each other. These undulating petals, just like a peony. And this was late March, early April, probably starting to bloom around mid-March, and then blooming through the middle of April, kind of sequentially. Again, you're going to have flowers in bud and all the way up to flowers gone by on your plant. A remarkable tree, I should say. It's 10 feet tall. I think we can award it tree status. Could be the cultivar debutante. I want to say I'm like 80% confident in that. Debutante is a very similar plant. Large pink flowers, peony form, and proven cold 6B 7A hardiness. So again, debutante is a wise plant to procure. So now let's jump into kind of the broad list of winter flowering trees and shrubs, and we're going to start from the largest and work our way to the smallest, generally. And that's not absolute. So we'll start with red maple, Acer rubrum. And a lot of people know red maple for the beautiful fall color, the reds and oranges and yellows on the roadsides and in our yards and gardens, but also great yellow flowers, beautiful red flowers produced in March. Right now, a lot of the red maple buds are swelling, maybe just starting to open. So as we get into March here, we'll see the red maples come into flower. And because it's not competing with a lot of plants, it's actually quite beautiful. It really grabs your attention. Whereas if it were to bloom in June or May, it wouldn't do such thing. And again, a lot of these winter flowering shrubs, early spring flowering shrubs, I think the cold weather kind of preserves the flowers. A lot of these plants, like witch hazels, red maples, and some of the other plants we'll look at, their flower period lasts a long time. I think the cold weather kind of preserves the integrity of the flowers and like the petals and the reproductive structures. So generally blooming over a longer period of time than say a May or a June flowering plant. Cornelian cherry, Cornus mas, one of my favorite winter flowering trees, may mature to be 20 to 30 feet tall with a similar width, flowering in mid-March usually where it peaks. Right now you can just start to see some color as the flower buds are just starting to open. Super floriferous, slightly fragrant. I wouldn't say it's a pleasant fragrance, not a bad one either. A beautiful tree, and again, because it's not competing with anything, it really is a standout in the March landscape. Also, wonderful exfoliating bark with oranges and tans, coloration as well. So beautiful in many ways. Cultivated for many centuries as a fruit crop. The dark red ovate fruits, although there's not a lot of substance to them, are very sweet. So it's been cultivated for many years as a fruit crop. It's native to Eastern Europe, like Serbia, Romania, in the mountains there. A wonderful flowering tree. Spring Glow is probably the most popular cultivated variety of Cornus mas. You'll see that it here on the left. Just probably larger inflorescences, more floriferous. Maybe the flowers are a little bit brighter. Not quite sure about that. They can say that. But probably one of the more popular varieties available, and you can see a close look at the flowers. Beautiful, a true yellow coloration. Again, appearing in March, and again, effective for a long period of time. So might start, the first week of March and stretch throughout the month, ending in early April. Star magnolia, a little bit later. You could make the argument that in Rhode Island, at least, I know in Georgia or South Carolina, star magnolia would be a winter flowering shrub, a true winter flowering tree or shrub. In Rhode Island, it's probably more of a spring flowering plant, but we're going to throw it on here because it's great. Becomes a small, usually multi-stemmed tree, sometimes a large shrub, depending on cultivated variety. But usually over many years will mature to be 20 to 30 feet tall. 30 feet might be a little bit of a stretch. 20 feet tall, 20 feet wide, usually multi-stemmed, smooth bark. And obviously its moneymaker is the beautiful white flowers that usually, depending on location, if it's in like an area where it's up against a south-facing wall, so that radiative heat, it's free flowering. So again, some of that radiative heat might allow it to bloom in March. Take a sip of water. The third or fourth week of March, depending on location. Beautiful fragrance, a wonderful sweet fragrance that wafts from distance. And you'll notice that the tepals, which are petals for magnolia, are produced in abundance. Usually star magnolia produces anywhere from like 15 to 50 or more tepals on some of these cultivated varieties. And the flowers are generally white, maybe slightly pink on the outsides of the tepals as they emerge. And there's some cultivated varieties that are more of a red, or I should say a pink flower. So beautiful plant. And again, more of a spring flowering plant, but we're going to include it anyway because it's great. Winter hazel, Coralopsis spicata. A number of Coralopsis species. I'm not sure how many people know about this plant, but it certainly deserves more recognition. It's a small shrub, may mature to be more of a medium-sized shrub, densely branched. The flowers emerge in the beginning of March, kind of slowly opening and expanding downwards into April. Depending on species and cultivar, you might get fragrance, but as far as I could tell, the Coralopsis spicata doesn't produce much of a fragrance. Prove me wrong. But the plants that I've observed don't really have much of a fragrance, at least on this species. And you can see these beautiful pendulous racemes, and a raceme is basically just a flower stalk with the flower buds arranged down the flower stalk. And these flowers are effective for a long time. Again, starting in March and then peaking towards the end of March, early April. A beautiful shrub. Again, not too big. It definitely has a place in the shrub border or in the garden. Striking for sure. Flowers well before the leaves have emerged, so the color is very bright and unaffected by foliage. Another Coralopsis glaabrescens, longwood chimes. This is a plant I was familiar with at Blythewald, and this plant has a wonderful fragrance. Long racemes, long inflorescences that are effective through the month of March as they start to emerge in March and then reach full bloom at the end of the month or early April. Maybe like 1.5 to 2.5 inches long. And this plant was very sweetly fragrant. Longwood chimes, which is probably one of the more popular cultivated varieties. And like I mentioned, there are a handful of other Coralopsis species. And the taxonomy is a little bit muddled. The nomenclature is a little bit muddled. Some of these names change. Some of them get grouped together. Some of them get separated. There might be 20 species. Another authority might say there's 10 species. So there's been some good publications through the Arnold Arboretum that describe a lot of these species. Really great garden shrubs. Paperbush, Edgeworthia chrysantha, is really an interesting, almost bizarre plant that not many people know about. It grows to be kind of this awkward, interesting, small shrub. You can see the chocolate brown stems kind of start to break off and divide into two. So as you go up the plant, it breaks off into two, then it'll break off into two, then it'll break off into two. And then at the apices of the stems, you have these UFO-looking silvery flower buds that are formed in the summer and are retained through the wintertime. So in the wintertime, you'll come out and you'll say, what's going on? It's these kind of drooping flower buds, but they're silvery color. That's quite striking. And then as March comes around, usually in early March, the flower buds start opening. The downside of the plant is that because the flowers kind of droop down like that, in order to see the flowers, you kind of have to get underneath the plant. And it's not a large plant, maybe maturing to 6 to 7 feet tall, equally as wide. But the plant is the flowers are beautiful, beautiful yellow flowers and a wonderful fragrance that is really sweet and wafts a great distance. So you can if you have this plant in the garden and you're working in the garden in the early spring, you're going to smell this beautiful sweet fragrance, and it's going to be your Edgeworthia when you buy one, because many of you should. Adventurous gardeners should certainly try this plant. It is tender, or considered to be tender. Maybe would require protection in zone 6. I think most of coastal Rhode Island would probably be safe with this plant. But I would suggest protection to ensure best cultivation. So paperbush, Edgeworthia. I'm starting to see it more and more. So it's coming to our gardens. Interesting plant. Beautiful plant. Winter sweet, Chimonanthus praecox. This is more of a more popular plant in the south. Again, another plant that's tender, maybe listed at zone 7. I think we can probably squeeze it into zone 6B. It's a large shrub. These beautiful bell-shaped yellow flowers that form on naked stems. So again, before any leaves emerge, so the flowers are uncovered or unaffected by the foliage. and a wonderful fragrance, a wonderful sweet fragrance. The photo on the left here, I took this photo from a plant cultivated in Rhode Island. So successful culture is possible. Now we just need more gardeners and horticulturists to experiment and see if they can grow it as well. I am hoping to at some point see the plant in full glory, because these flowers are beautiful and produced in abundance, and a sweet fragrance as well. Even with one flower, you could get a nice taste of that sweet fragrance. So again, winter sweet Chimonanthus praecox, a plant for the collector and the adventurous gardener, but one that we probably should try more in Newport. Autumn flowering cherry, Prunus subhirtella autumnalis. Some of you are probably familiar with this tree. All of the plants we've talked about so far, most of them are flowering, after the new year, from January and then through the late winter into the early spring. This plant flowers in the fall. Well, I should say its main floral period is in the spring. This picture was taken, I want to say, in late March, early April, just as the buds are, the flowers are starting to open, and a lot of the buds are starting to swell and open. Pink, dark, rosy pink in bud, opening, these off pink, double flowers, non-fragrant. But in the autumn, usually around late October, early November, into late November, since the flower buds have formed on the previous season's growth, a lot of them are overly excited and want to bloom. So usually, if there's a few mild days, and even if the days aren't that mild, a number of flowers will pop open in through October and into November. This photo was taken in, I think, the second week of November. And this is consistent amongst this cultivar. This will happen to every cultivar, every individual plant, for the most part, will produce flowers in the autumn. And it will also, if the winter is mild through December, January, if you get mild days, you will have flowers emerge through the winter time, sometimes in great quantities. And then in the springtime, when the floral, there's the true bloom time, you'll have kind of almost a muted effect, because a lot of the flowers have bloomed through the wintertime and in the fall. So that is a downside of it. And so in the springtime, it might not be able to compete with the other flowering cherries, but it certainly gives you interest through the fall and into the winter, if you're going to have those mild periods. Grows to be, 20 feet tall, 25 feet tall, maybe slightly more wide, has a very graceful habit about it. Wonderful branching structure, a nice graceful spreading habit, a great garden tree. The bodnut viburnum bodnatense Dawn. This originated at the Bodnant Garden in Wales in the earliest 20th century. It is a hybrid between Viburnum farrii and Viburnum grandiflorum. Viburnum grandiflorum, also a winter flowering shrub, actually through the fall and into the winter, but I have not observed it. Bodnant viburnum, probably, again, more of a collector's item plant, but this plant is available. Beautiful pink flowers emerge just as the leaves are starting to emerge and expand. The flower buds usually start to slowly work their way open as the winter culminates, and usually in mid-March is when you're going to have the peak of the floral period. Wonderful fragrance. That, again, a wonderful fragrance, and like I've said before, a lot of these plants need a fragrance to attract pollinators because of their blooming period. So again, more of a collector's item. The floral effect isn't, it doesn't produce flowers in great quantities. If it were flowering in May or June, it wouldn't be able to compete with the lilacs and the other viburnums. But because it blooms in March, it is truly a spectacle. The brilliant flowers are a sight for sore eyes on a dreary March day, and you just can't help but go up to them and photograph them and give them a smell. It grows to be a tall, straggly shrub, kind of leggy, maybe maturing to 10 feet tall, 10 feet wide, and probably would benefit from being underplanted with other shrubs or perennials to kind of hide its legginess, but adds value because of its floral period. Japanese Pieris, Pieris japonica. We all know Japanese Pieris. It's an extremely common landscape plant, a lot of, a common foundation plant, an evergreen used for screening sometimes, native to Japan, in the Ericaceae family. So it's in the same family as the rhododendrons, the kothoi, things like that. But it is really one of the best reliable winter flowering shrubs. It will flower as early as late February, early March, depending on the weather. And is, again, the cool weather, it does a good job of preserving these flowers. It'll be effective for over a month, and kind of works its way down the raceme. So the blooming will start at the top, these white bell-shaped flowers, and the blooming will just work its way down over the coming weeks. So it's effective for a long period of time, and the white flowers contrast really nicely with the dark green glossy foliage. So this is a plant that, although it's super common, it is really one of the best winter flowering shrubs available. The literature describes the plants as maturing to 10 feet tall, maybe equal width. But we have some plants in Newport that absolutely shatter those numbers. This plant is at Chateau-sur-Mer, probably 15 feet tall, maybe even closer to 20, and like 25 feet wide. So a massive plant that shatters what the books say about it. But plants don't read books, so a common plant, but certainly a good winter flowering shrub. Not much fragrance from this one, at least as far as I can tell. Fragrant honeysuckle, Lonicera fragrantissima. This plant, I just can't get excited about this plant. You look at the picture here on the right. It's not overly stunning. The flowers are kind of small. They don't really have any exciting color to them. The plant is robust. It's very twiggy. It's very dense. It's not a very attractive plant, but it is extremely fragrant. And if you can place it right in the garden, and you can kind of go other places and look at other things, and then get the fragrance from the fragrant honeysuckle, that's an added bonus. Probably best for just cutting stems and forcing them now in February, and getting that fragrance in your house. Can be a really robust shrub, maybe 10 feet tall, equal width, very dense, very twiggy. Maybe may sucker a little bit. Just not my favorite plant. Shouldn't be the focal point of the garden. But if you can have it and position it properly and get that fragrance, it can be valuable. There might be a invasive potential with this one as well, as with many of the Loniceras, the honeysuckles. Japanese Mahonia japonica. This is one of my favorite plants. I think I can confidently say at this point that this is one of my favorite plants. An interesting evergreen, kind of a robust shrub with these spiky, and they are spiky. You do not want to grab a handful of these leaves. Glossy dark green foliage, kind of like a holly leaf, but it's not a holly because the leaves are arranged opposite each other. Actually, this is a compound leaf as a whole here. So I don't know what the bud arrangement is on the growth of this plant, but large compound leaves, and if you look, there's no petiole on the leaflets. So it kind of, when the leaves kind of come together, they have this kind of, the center is this kind of where it fuses. It's kind of this lighter yellow color. It almost looks like a cyclops, which is kind of interesting. But we're here to talk about flowers, and the flowers are produced in late February, early March on a more mild winter. If it's a colder winter, it might be as late as April. I want to say this photograph here on the left was taken in Providence in late March, maybe the third week of March. And these large flower spikes, and just like the Pieris, the flowers will bloom sequentially, starting from the base of the inflorescence and working their way up the spike. So again, a long bloom period, very interesting plant for foliage and flower. Maybe slightly tender. You might want to put this plant in a protected location. It might be kind of coarse. So again, landscape and garden placement is important because of its coarse nature, but certainly an interesting plant. Like I said, one of my favorite plants. I love this plant. I don't really know what it is about it. I guess it's all of its attributes kind of combined. Really give me a lot of joy. I like this plant. Persian ironwood, Parodia persica. Some of you might be familiar with Persian ironwood. Flowering in, I want to say, from late February to late March. The flowers are very small, and generally on Parodia, the branching is kind of upright, spreading. You don't really get to a good look often at the flowers. They kind of slowly open up in February and slowly work their way to a full bloom in you probably mid to late March, maybe even early April. And you really have to pay attention to it because these, although close up, these bright scarlet red stamens is what they are. The male reproductive structure of the plant are quite fascinating and beautiful, but they, you really have to look closely at this plant to see the flowers, but they certainly are interesting. Persian ironwood grows to be a medium-sized tree, kind of an upright habit, native to Iran, and wonderful exfoliating bark on Parodia persica. So really a four-season plant, wonderful fall color, exfoliating bark, and interesting flowers emerging in late spring, late winter to early spring.
Hey, Joe, just a time check. It's 11:02. We've got some questions.
All right, perfect timing.
Looks like we're right at the end. Thank you.
That is the end of the plant list. I just want to go over quickly where you can purchase these plants. And I always say, go local first. Check with your local garden centers and nurseries. I've listed a few. Sylvan's in Westport. Hugendorn is in Middletown. Bigelow Nurseries is in Worcester, Mass. Peckham's is in Little Compton. Farmer's Daughter is in South Kingston. Redwood is in Swansea. Morningstar in South Kingston or West Kingston. Central Nursery, and more. And some of the non-local nurseries that you can get mail order plants to find some of these more tender plants, like the Chimonanthus precox, the winter hazel, and or the winter sweet, and the camellias, and some of the more tender plants. Edgeworthia, you could try some of these nurseries in the South, like Woodlanders, Camellia Forest. They're camellia experts at Camellia Forest, as you might imagine. Forest Farm, we've gotten a lot of mail order plants from them. They've got very interesting stuff. Broken Arrow in Connecticut carries a lot of interesting plant material, interesting and exotic plant material, as does Rare Find Nursery in New Jersey. So with that, I will finish talking, and I will take your questions.
Thanks so much, Joe. We've got a couple questions that have been in the chat, so I'll go back. Carter, during the section on witch hazels, asked if you could address fall color of the foliage and how it might differ by species.
That's a great question. So what I've noticed, the common witch hazels have a nice yellow fall color, a bright yellow fall color, as was photographed. The vernal witch hazel may have more of a yellow to an orange fall color, and that will vary based on cultivar, but generally has a nice orange fall color. And then the Asiatic species and hybrid species, again, it's very cultivar dependent. A lot of times in the hybrid species, you'll see kind of the outer margins of the leaves color first with kind of this brilliant orange color, and then it'll kind of evolve into an orange, maybe like a lighter orange to a yellow, but very, very cultivar dependent on the hybrids and the Asiatic species. But our two American native species both have brilliant fall color with the yellows and the oranges of Hemamelis virginiana and Hemamelis vernalis, respectively.
Thank you, Joe. I've got two questions that kind of might fit together. Susan wants to know if you have any tips on protecting new plantings from rabbits, and Mary Alice similarly asked, how do you protect plants? But I'm thinking Mary Alice might be talking about temperature things.
So I'll answer both of those questions then. So for rabbits, I would say you could protect with deer fencing. There's kind of the deer cage. You see some plants, they look like they're in jail. You got the plastic, that tough plastic caging you can use. You can wrap plants. Rabbits will be deterred by granule. You'll see like rabbit off or deer off. You can put down granule. You can put down deer spray. I would say it's best to just provide a low netting protection or a fencing protection around the base of your plants. It's probably the most effective way. And you can use granules and deer sprays and rabbit spray products, which are widely available as well. And it might be best to use a combination of the two. As for protecting your plants from the cold, obviously, if you can protect your plants with a wall or foundation, proper positioning of the plant to protect it from icy winds. You can also wrap it in burlap or plastic. A lot of people will wrap their plants in winter protection in plastic or in burlap.
Thanks so much, Joe. I do want to thank everyone so much for joining us this morning. We will hang out for a little while if folks want to ask more questions. You might have seen in the chat that I allowed for you to unmute now. So as Joe stops sharing his screen, as I said, we'll hang out for a few more minutes. Thank you so much, everyone.
Oh,